Hey, everybody. How's it going? Hi. Hi. Hey. Hi. Hi. So, this is a talk called Making Modern Websites. My name is Patrick Kettner. This is me. If you ever see me online, I pretty much use that avatar everywhere. I like to take pictures with cakes. My girlfriend makes them for me. She's over there. She's really cool if you want to say hi. I also work at Microsoft, and I work specifically on Edge. I'm a program manager for Interop. So basically, if something in Edge is shitty, it's probably my fault or my problem to get it fixed. So feel free to complain to me either in person or online. That being said, Edge isn't shitty. It's a really great browser. Check it out. So anyway, I'm not here to talk about Edge. I'm here to talk about websites, specifically making websites, and specifically how making websites is hard, or at least to make good websites. And it's really hard, and it didn't used to be. When I was a kid, some of my first websites looked a lot like this. Not quite this very first website, but it was just, throw up some stuff, HTML on a page, and it's done. And it's better than most things in the world, because most of the websites in the world didn't exist yet. But now there's just a ton of new features that get added to the web platform every single day, and it's kind of overwhelming, and you just kind of feel like you have to know everything, and it sucks, and you just kind of want to make it stop, but you don't, though. You don't want to make it stop, you want to make it better, and we make it better by using tools. There's a lot of tools out there because there's a lot of different feature sets. I actually work on one specifically. I'm the lead maintainer for Modernizer. It's the most second used JavaScript library on the web after jQuery. If you don't know, it's basically like a feature detection library. Rather than do like user agent sniffing, you're able to check to see if a feature exists, and if it does, do something. It's cool. It's really popular. Justin Bieber actually has a Modernizer hoodie for some reason. This is an actual photo. He really owns that. It costs like $500. It's from France. I don't know why they have it, but Modernizer's on it. I thought it was funny. Anyway, so Modernizer actually came out with version 3 recently. Version 2 was in 2011, so version 3 getting shipped finally was kind of a big deal for me. It was a very prolonged pregnancy. We just shipped it, and if you haven't looked at Modernizer since we shipped it in September, you might be familiar with this. This is the website. It served us well since 2011. It was fine at the time. It got kind of aged, so we ended up spending a lot of time wanting to update this and make it better. We did a whole lot of work. The whole team did a whole bunch of work, and eventually we came up with this, which is the new website. And it was cool. It took a lot of energy. It took a lot of work, and no one gives a shit about it other than me. No one really cares. At best, Modernizer just doesn't get in the way. Like if you're wanting a new, no one's going to modernizer.com every morning when they wake up. They're only doing it because they want to make better websites. They want to get a tool and get out of the way. We're a pit stop at best along their way. But we still want to make our users happy. And we do that by making it really, really fast and having a whole lot of fun features in it. So, like I said, this was the website, but what I'm going to be talking about mostly is the download page, which is a kind of a complicated app, which looks like this. So, this is the new website, and this is the gentleman who designed the new website, a guy named Joe Critchley out of England. He's great. And like most designers, when he went and created a new website, he wanted to make it look pretty with the fonts, because a lot of the website fonts are kind of boring. And so he used the FontFace API. FontFace loads custom fonts. It's great. And it makes your website look all nice and fancy, unless you have a slow internet connection, like I'm sure all of you are aware right now, in which case the website looks like this, which sucks, because the website's completely broken. You can't do anything on it, but it actually does work. It just looks broken. Everything functions. You just have to be a mind reader or use like the accessibility API to be able to access it. And so the way to get around that is there's a great new API called the Font Loading Module. If you're not aware, this is a new JavaScript API that's been added a while back in Chrome. And what it looks like is this. You have a new document.fonts property that has a .ready method, and that gives you a promise. That promise gets fired with the results once the fonts have been loaded. Previously, if you wanted to know if a font had been loaded, you had to wait until the actual load event fired, then you had to wait for it to parse, and the only way you could know that is if you inject it into Canvas and check the width of the character length in Canvas by pixels. It was terrible. This is great. This is a godsend. And so the only problem with it, so rather than having a font definition that looks like this, where you define your website, your website fonts after your custom fonts, you end up having two different declarations like this, one with your body at the top, where you have your websafe fonts, and then underneath it you have the fonts loaded class, which is where what gets added when the font's loaded. So instead of this, it looks like this, and then after a couple seconds, it goes like that. A little font dance, and otherwise it's great. It's a great API. It makes your websites load a lot faster. The only problem is the support. It's only supported in Chrome and Firefox right now, and working at Microsoft, I can't really ship something that doesn't work good in the browser, or at least work in the browser. It also doesn't work in Safari or mobile iOS, so it's not really ideal. But there is a thing, a polyfill, called Font Face Observer by Bram Stein. It's great. Rather than your code look like this, you just make a minor change. You import the Font Face Observer, and otherwise your code looks the same. We just add a class at the bottom inside of, once the font's been loaded, we add a class to the body, and you're good. But breaking news. Wait for it. Breaking news. So there's actually a new CSS property called Font Display. It does the exact same thing. It'll swap out your fonts as soon as the font's loaded, rather than like blocking or waiting till the next read load or anything. It's a great API. It's brand new, like literally brand new. It's December 1st, like a couple of days ago. It just got added to Chrome Canary. So probably a year from now, everything I just said is complete nonsense. You won't need to do it. But this is great. That's the future. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So this is, like I said, this is kind of this weird dancey thing that happens when the fonts load. It's not ideal, especially if you have real design-focused people. So rather than setting a class, you also have the option to do like set a property in local storage. Then the next time it loads, you can check if that local storage is already there at the very top of your body, set that class immediately, and your fonts are constantly that one font. It's better. And if it's cached properly and the user didn't clear part of their cache or the browser didn't clear part of their cache, and the point being, this was always basically an educated guess. We don't know for a fact whether or not that font's going to be there without that skip, unless we use something like Service Worker. So Service Workers are really cool. They're kind of a big deal. If you've never heard of them, yeah, has anybody not heard of Service Workers before? No? Great, cool. So it's adds a whole lot of new features to the web platform, stuff like offline experiences, push notifications, background sync, and much, much more. But the two parts that I'm going to be discussing are kind of the more fundamental pieces, fetch and cache. So they're both new APIs. Fetch is sort of a network proxy. Any network request that goes out through the browser, whether it be from CSS, XHR, JavaScript, anything at all, as long as it's from your same domain, it'll go through fetch. You have the opportunity to catch that request, modify it, send it on, do whatever you want. Cache is like the browser cache, only it's completely programmable, so you're able to control what goes into it. So we avoid that whole is it or is it not cached thing. So Modernizer, the website, was completely built on Require.js modules because it's old. And so every one of these like checkboxy things and anything you can click on pretty much is its own module. There's 259 modules today. There'll probably be like 262 once I start getting back to my house and merging commits that came in. And any single one of those modules could end up being dozens of requests. And as a result, we want to add it to our service worker. And the way we do that is like this. We do navigator.serviceworker.register. It's a new API. You pass it a string that represents the path to a JavaScript file. That JavaScript file looks something like this. This is an example of us prefetching our Totally Rad Sans font. We set up a cache up here, which is just an object with a namespace, because you can have multiple caches if you want to delete one and keep another. Then we add an event listener for the install event. On install is when the service worker has been installed into the browser, and then we go out and we prefetch each one of these URLs. So you can, it's pretty straightforward. And so later on, we'll have this, which is the fetch event. And the fetch event is that network proxy thing that I mentioned before. Every time that a fetch event happens, which is any network request, it goes through here. We check to see if the response is already cached. If it is, we respond with that, so it happens immediately rather than going over to a server farm somewhere and coming back to your computer. You can just read it straight off the disk, and if it's not there, we go and we fetch it, and then we cache that response so that if it's requested again in the future, it's there. It's great. It's simple. The problem, again, the support's not very great. It's pretty much only in Chrome. It's going to be in Firefox in a couple of weeks in early January. So we need, it sucks. We need like some kind of hero. We need some kind of savior. We need a douchebag, and we need app cache. So a couple of years ago, Jake Archibald gave a talk at JSConf called App Cache is a Douchebag. It's an awesome talk if you've never seen it. It gives a lot of background into what App Cache is. That was the original kind of fork off of Google Gears that was supposed to be how we were going to make offline applications. The problem was it's a douchebag and it sucks a lot. Service Worker is way better. If you have the opportunity to only make something for Chrome or to make something specifically using a Service Worker, don't even look at App Cache. It's horrible. But it is supported everywhere. Pretty much any browser you'd want to develop something for supports it. And so And it happens to cover our use, which is basically caching everything and then returning it immediately if it's there. So the way that it works is you just have a plain text file that's a cache manifest. Looks something like this. You'll have a comment up at the top to do cache invalidation, because the browser will check to see if any new version of the manifest is byte for byte the same, and if it isn't, it will re-download everything, which is what we want to happen when we do releases. We list a couple of static files we want to have downloaded, and then I have this double under assets thing. That's something that gets programmatically added. We're injecting a whole bunch of like the individual modules that we're creating for the website. That way we don't have to maintain a list of them in multiple places. It just gets added in like a gulp script. Then the only other important thing is down here, the network asterisk. What that means is that as you're browsing, everything that comes from your domain gets added to the app cache automatically. So it looks something like this. You just have a manifest attribute on your browser, and right there, and again, Service Worker is much better than App Cache, though, so we don't want to have to inject it unless we need it. App Cache is a douchebag. It completely takes over your entire page. All your Service Worker responses would be confusing and a lot more difficult to reason about, and you get into a weird state that you want to do. So you only want to use App Cache if Service Worker isn't there. We do this registration like this. If Service Worker is in Navigator, then we register it, and if it isn't, we check to see if App Cache is on the window, and if it is, we add the App Cache. The problem is you can't add it by JavaScript to that page. You have to the manifest file has to be there on page load. And so what we can do to get around this is load it in an iframe. We create basically a dummy page, and add that has an app cache on it. We load that iframe on the page, and we inject it into the page, and then everything's loaded. It's great. So this is like an example dummy file. All it's doing is loading the app cache, and it's injected to it. And we go from loading the Modernizer website on the wonderful provided Wi-Fi here, went from 20 seconds to 190 milliseconds. On reload. So it's a substantial savings. Anytime I'm on an airplane, anytime I'm on a train or at Amelia Island at JSConf, it's always wonderful if a website's properly using this stuff, so check it out if you haven't. But again, Service Workers are much better than App Cache. Service Workers are the future. Web Workers are the future. And that's Web Workers. If you're not familiar with Web Workers, they've been around actually for a long time, November of 2008. They shipped in Chrome version 2 in 2009 when it looked like that. Like, it's been around for a very long time. They're pretty similar to to Service Workers in the way that you interact with them, but the purpose for them are completely different. Web Workers are a solution to the problem with the browser that everything is single-threaded. Because layout is constantly fighting for resources on top of all of your logic, if you have a whole lot of different stuff going on at once, it creates these really ugly, janky experience that sucks, and it's not a good website, and it sucks. So what you're able to do is you're able to take tasks and offload them to a background thread so that your UI is able to constantly update in the way that you want it to, but you can still do those heavy crunching things. It's great. So super expensive functions become really cheap, and one of the things that we ended up doing with it was creating dynamic file size calculation. So if you look, again, this is that website that I've shown you a number of times. Up in the left-hand corner, it actually says the number of kilobytes and bytes of every file that you have that's been created. So as you check stuff, it updates with those values. Now this is 100% client-side. There's nothing talking to a server because we want this to work completely offline. The way that we do that was through a web worker. We register that web worker with a little, we call it gzip worker, and it's just a basic function that gets a JSON object, and that passes it to that JSON object to a worker, and then files are called back to update the UI later on. Inside the gzip file, we import a couple of node modules, Paco, which is a JavaScript implementation of the deflate algorithm for gzipping, and then PrettyBytes, which takes something like 100 bytes and makes it into 0.1 kilobytes. It makes it more human readable and pretty. So we just listen for the message. We parse the build out of it. So we would pass the entire build of Modernizer to this function. And then we would take that string, we pass it into PrettyBytes. PrettyBytes figures out how small, we get the original size of it through PrettyBytes. Then we also pass PrettyBytes the gzipped and Paco deflate, which is a gzipped minified version of it, with the average server level, which is 6, and that gives us the size of the files. So you see originally it was 2.64 kilobytes, gzipped it's down to 1.18 for these first 3 things that are clicked. Now, That's not the only other worker. Because we want to be able to update that on the fly, we have to build stuff constantly, which means we can't wait for someone to click on the build button. We want to be able to build in the background, and the way we do that, again, is through a web worker. So we have a separate worker for building. It's very similar. We register it the exact same way, and we post a message with the config file. All of the Modernizer require modules are built through one big JSON config that gets passed into the worker. And the worker loads up the Modernizer require.js-based builder, and then that does then it registers for onMessage, and then that does the building of Modernizer, and it reports back with the final string. So basically, you're just passing this along. It's exactly like you would imagine. You just pass in a config file, you get out a string. The only difference is that it's on a background thread, so we can be doing this constantly in the background, and you wouldn't even notice. So by the time that somebody actually clicks that big pink build button in the corner, it's already been built, usually for several seconds. But they might be asking, what if their browser doesn't support web workers? Well, first of all, it's been around forever, so pretty much all browsers do support them. They're awesome, and you should use them. But if they don't, it's not that big a deal. They click on the build button, and then we just build then. It's fine. They're on an older browser. They're used to shitty experiences. We can just click on that button and go on. So that build button actually doesn't give you a file. It opens up a pop-up most of the time, with a couple of options. One of them is to copy to clipboard, the other is to download. Copy to clipboard, again, is something that has been really difficult to do right on the web for a very long time. We use a thing called Zero Clipboard. It's a pretty simple API. You just load it up, and you give it you listen for click event. It gives you the clipboard data. You add your own data to a clipboard, and it's done. It's pretty straightforward. The really crappy thing is it's powered by Flash. It's one little Flash control that's put on anything you want to copy, and that's how it works. That's how GitHub stuff works. That's how the Modernizer site works currently, and it sucks. Flash sucks. You don't want to use Flash because who wants to have Flash installed on their machine? So we have a Modernizer detect to see whether or not Flash is installed and working, as in not blocked or click to play. And if it isn't, then we load Zero Clipboard, and if it is being blocked, then we load something else. And that something else is just a text area box. We just load up a plain old text area box, inject the values into it, and then automatically select it. Then that kind of command to copy to clipboard just becomes a request to go ahead and copy this to clipboard later on. It degrades pretty gracefully. Another breaking news, because the video doesn't work. Clipboard.js is a new way to do this that was added after I started writing this. It doesn't use Flash. It uses some of the exec command stuff that's been built in the browser forever that actually started working in Chrome recently. And it does the fallbacks automatically for you. If I were to rebuild this, I'd probably just use this. That being said, Zero Clipboard can be great if you need more browser support, especially on older browsers. Excuse me. The other option after copy to clipboard is download. Download is something, obviously, most of the people probably just want to get a file. They don't really want to copy it or paste it themselves. And so since this is 100% client-side, we do this using a couple different APIs, file blobs, URLs, and the download attribute. Now, file blobs are pretty straightforward. You just give it a string, and it creates a binary representation in memory that you're able to pass into another API called createObjectURL, which turns it into a blob URI, so instead of like http:// something, it's blob:// something, and you get a reference to that file that's being created on the client side. And then finally, we have a download attribute that lets it download with, instead of a random gibberish-looking string, it gives it a nice, pretty modernizer.custom.js name. So it ends up looking like this in our template. We set an href to that href, download, and a download. Works. You just get a pop-up, and it says modernizer custom download without ever talking to the server. It's great. So blob constructing is really well supported. Blob URLs are pretty well supported. Download attributes aren't, and that makes it a really kind of crappy experience. So for us, we considered it a no-go if they don't support it. Otherwise, they get this really random gibberish file. It doesn't work on certain versions or older versions of websites, of browsers specifically, IE. It makes it a lot more confusing experience, and a lot of the people that are using our website are newer web developers. And so we wanted to try to avoid that. So what we ended up doing was kind of thinking about how we structure this page. And if you'll notice, this pretty much is a giant list of checkboxes and a submit button. This is really just a form when you get down to it, even though it was kind of a web application. So we decided to just let people post the form. So basically what we do is instead of having this template anchor tag, we end up checking to see if it supports everything. If it is, we set it to that anchor tag. And if it isn't, we just change that download button to an input type submit, and that becomes a form that just submits. Then they submit that form, and they get it posts to the server, and the server itself processes the file, sends it back, and it all works. This is all possible because we're using Decent Markup. Decent Markup is actually supported in all browsers. For the most part, it's when you use HTML properly. And what's cool about using Decent Markup is that when you use, we have a whole lot of CSS on the site, but you don't actually need to use it. The website still works completely without CSS, like completely without CSS. Everything functions. You can check off new stuff, and it calculates the new values, and everything functions completely right. It's great. Then on top of that, since we're doing all this stuff on basically just a form, we don't even need JavaScript anymore. It actually functions completely in Lynx, the old text-based browser. So you can actually have this website. Oh gosh, sorry. Oh god. Yeah, you can have the browser do stuff, and you don't get the file size calculations, you don't get the dynamic counting, but you're not really expecting to have that experience on here. You just hit the build button once you're done, download it, save to disk, save the file, and there we go. Cat Modernizer, and it's there in gzip. And my terminal's broken. It's there, it works, it's great. So, it's awesome. It's 100% client-side. Unless it can't, then it can fall back, and it still works. It works pretty much in all browsers because we have a couple of little tiny pieces in the server side. Even though it's mostly static files, like this is basically our entire server config. We use Happy. It's like 20 lines plus a couple other little cleanup things. But all we're doing is reading out of the distribution directory and getting your path, applying it to that, and serving that file. And that's it. It's clean. It's safe. Everything works. It's wonderful. But again, it's almost 100% because we wanted to support that post environment. So what we end up doing is creating a little function that we build from a posted query. We grab the payload of the post, and we send it through the Modernizer API on the server side, apply the that header, Jesus Christ, to it to get the file back, and then add that to the route config, and we're good. It works for all browsers, like really all browsers. It literally works in Mosaic. If you open it in Mosaic, I tried it today. It's awesome. It's really cool. The internet is awesome. HTML is awesome. You're able to make some really cool stuff. But again, no one cares. We have all these tools. They don't really care whether or not the website is great or how the work went into it. If it doesn't fit their workflow, they don't want to go out of their way, they being developers, to download a new website or to download your site, to see the site, to get the build every single time they want to make a change. They just want it to work for their tool chain to get out of the way. So one of the biggest requests we had was to make it work for NPM and Bower. And people always said, I want a Bower install. We had dozens of issues on GitHub with people saying that, why can't we Bower install it? Or I want to NPM install it. And the problem is that there isn't a file. Everything's modular. There used to be one single Modernizer file. That's not been the case for years. And so we say, you can't. And they say, but I want to. And so again, no one cares. The problem is that we can't really, like our process, the reason why we're pushing back against it is we can't really pre-compile all these things and push it, because again, there are 259 modules. You figure out the math, it's like, there's not, I don't think there's a name for how big that number is. It's ridiculously big, 616 decimal places. We would blow up NPM. We would take it all down if we tried to publish everything to it. But no one cares that we can't do that. They just want it to work. They just want it to do it because it works. So we were like, we have to solve this. We figured the server is already doing builds for posted things, and there's already a unique way to identify individual builds of Modernizer using the header that's at the top of any file that's ever been built. So what we ended up doing is making it so that you can npm install that URL. And the same server that serves the HTML for Modernizer actually will respond with a tarball for Bower or for NPM. And so that, again, 99.99 static files. This is the one other edge case. If we get to the handler for the download page, it checks to see if your user agent is Bower. If it does, it builds for Bower. Checks to see if your user agent's NPM. It builds for NPM. Otherwise, it serves the HTML for the page. So Modernizer is using a user agent sniff to give you a good feature, and that's embarrassing, but it works, and there's no other better way. So, so this is really all that's in there for build for Bower. We just grabbed this great Node package called Archiver, create a tarball, and then create the Bower JSON file, which is just like a static file with a couple little pieces in it. The name, if you've ever used Bower, it's like it's package.json, the name of the file, stuff like that, where it came from. And then we append the actual build, and we reply with a big tarball. And so if you Bower install that, you get a tarball back, and it works. Same thing with NPM. As you can tell, there's basically no difference. The only difference is inside of this the creation of the JSON file. That's a little bit different. And the namespacing is actually different on NPM. These are not accurate, but otherwise it's the same. And so you might have noticed that we're actually loading the Modernizer module in there, and it's kind of confusing, whereas like I thought you said it wasn't on NPM. And the problem is that there is a Modernizer module, but it's actually for the CLI command line tool. So most of the time when people are talking about we're wanting to require Modernizer, they don't actually mean the command line tool. They mean a build of Modernizer that they can load on their website and just get it to work and get their day done and get over it. So this is what the command line thing looks like, and it's useful for us because we've been able to build all these tools off of it, and it works great. You just can end up creating a file and blah. It's very flexible, but it's not super friendly, especially if you are new to web browsers like a lot of people are. They're not familiar with the CLI. They don't want to use the CLI, one of the two. And so we were like, let's try and make this better rather than passing a whole lot of flags. We had an interface that we liked, and so we wanted to reuse it. And so we did. I created a command line version of our website that works completely in the browser, or sorry, in the command line. You do all that stuff, you can hit build, and you can open it on CodePen, and it opens in the browser. And yeah, you can check to see if it works, and it works. It's cool. And what's cool about that is that, so if people aren't necessarily comfortable with building in the browser, or sorry, building on the command line, we can give them basically the exact same experience, and it's a great kind of introduction to it. And it's cool. We were able to basically reuse the vast majority of our code because React is cool. And React is awesome. It makes it, we are able to reuse the stuff, and we're able to port it directly to React Blest, which is the command line API that we're using. And it's a really cool hack, and it really works really well. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I have to say, but I just want to leave with this. No one really cares how cool your website is if it doesn't work or if it takes a long time to get there. If you have really slow animations, if you do all these things, people just want to get their work done most of the time, especially when you're working on a tool. But so what our goal is to get out of the way in the best way possible, make it the most enjoyable experiences as possible, but get out of the way quickly. Don't let that stop you from making awesome stuff, and don't let that stop you from using new shiny features. You can use a lot of really cool stuff and still make it really fast and work really well, and just have a lot of fun. So.